Okay, lovely to see you here today, and thank you for everyone that's joining us online. Very warm welcome to the slightly chilly John Rylands Research Institute and Library this morning. So excited to be launching the digital edition of the Mary Hamilton papers today. These papers are in the Rylands because of the intervention of the Culture Minister, David Lammy, who placed a temporary export embargo on the archive in 2006, giving institutions the chance to purchase it and keep the archive in the UK. We're very pleased that the John Rylands Library was interested and was successful in raising sufficient funds for the purchase price. The purchase was made possible by generous grants from the MLA, the V&A Grant Funds, the Pilgrim Trust, the Friends of the National Libraries, the Society of Dilettante Charitable Trust, and the National Lottery Heritage Memorial Fund, and the Friends of the John Rylands. Now, Unlocking the Mary Hamilton Papers project as a whole, and the edition that it's produced, is the work of many people, some of whom you're going to see today, and some of whom are sitting here. Researchers, library staff, including imaging team, the MDC Manchester Digital Collections team, curators and cataloguers, but many more people too. We're very excited to be able to tell you more about the project today and to reveal some of the fruits of our labours. What I should have said at the beginning, but I forgot, but I'll say it now, is that we are recording today's session. So please mute yourself if you don't want to be recorded. And I guess if you're in the room, hide under the table. Here is the incredibly glamorous Hamilton team. My photo is at least 15 years out of date. This is our Hamilton, the core Hamilton team, who are involved in this Arts and Humanities Research Council funded project. 3-year project. We are sadly nearing the end, but the project itself continues. And do see our website for all the exciting things we're doing. All these people listed here are going to talk to you today, so I shan't introduce them now. And after we've talked about our project for about an hour, there'll be time for any comments or any questions that you have. So please do think of something to ask us. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to one of my collaborators on the project, Sophie Colombo.
Thank you very much, Hannah. So Hannah has given a brief overview of the project, the archive's provenance and the team makeup, and it now falls to me to give a brief overview of the project's subject. Mary Hamilton is really, as a subject, rather many splendid. And part of the joy of this project for me has been gaining an understanding of the ways in which she sort of resists and complicates categorisation. In the past, she's been mainly known, if at all, for her family and her royal connections. She was the niece of Sir William Hamilton, husband to Emma, of course, and as a young woman, she spent time at the court of George III as sub-governess to the older princesses, although in the event she spent just as much time parrying the unwanted amorous attentions of their brother, the Prince of Wales and the future George IV. After leaving court, she spent several years living in London and moving in illustrious intellectual circles, which included people like Samuel Johnson, Joshua Reynolds, Elizabeth Montagu, Hannah More, Frances Burney, Elizabeth Carter, Horace Walpole, James Boswell, the Duchess of Portland and Mary Delaney, the list goes on. In 1785, she married John Dickinson, the son of a Lancashire landowner, and she spent much of the rest of her life based at his estate near Manchester, with him and their daughter Louisa. But the Dickinsons were a really mobile and sociable couple, And over the 1790s and the 1800s, they took numerous long trips to London, Bath, and elsewhere in the south of England, where they saw old friends, made new ones, and documented some of the upheavals they experienced. Although she was never published in her lifetime, I think there's a strong case for seeing Mary Hamilton, first and foremost, as a reader and writer. She read voraciously across manifold authors and genres, in both manuscript and in print, and she wrote exquisitely detailed diaries of her daily life, thousands of letters to her friends and acquaintances, manuscript books consisting of anecdotes, poetry and prose, and she made catalogues of some of the collections of her eminent friends like Walpole and Portland. So she was really a pivotal figure in the manuscript culture and the artistic world of the Bluestockings. For example, she played a large part in the development of Hannah More's poem Conversation, or the Bas Bleu, and she brokered the sale of her uncle Sir William's vase, the Barberini vase, to the Duchess of Portland. Overall, I think we could see her as a chronicler of sorts, recording the characters, achievements and interactions, both verbal and textual, of her social set for posterity. As Hannah has already indicated, much, although not all, of Hamilton's large manuscript archive is held here at the John Rylands Research Institute and Library in Manchester. We find just over 2,500 items here, including letters, both to and from Hamilton, diaries, manuscript books and catalogues. This is a little illustration of a hot air balloon that she made when she went to see one in flight. But in addition to this collection at the Rylands, hundreds of other items relating to Hamilton are held in 11 other archives, libraries and private collections, both in the UK and in the USA. We'll be acknowledging those at the end of this presentation. And so our digital edition, for the first time, seeks to bring these far-flung holdings together. I want to very briefly here summarise, or try to summarise, our main aims on this project, to give an idea of what sorts of principles and aspirations have underlain the creation of this digital edition to which we're about to introduce you. Now, for one thing, of course, we really wanted to make these incredibly valuable and quite underused in some cases documents freely available to multiple audiences and publics. But that's not in itself the be-all and end-all. We also wanted to use this digital edition to enable interdisciplinary and intermethodological research that wouldn't have been possible without it. So these are the 4 research strands that drive our project. Reading practices. How can textual traces of reader circulation, reception and response contained in the Hamilton papers help us to think differently about 18th century and Romantic literature? And this is the research strand for which Cassie and I are responsible. Norms and usage. What evidence can the Hamilton papers provide of the influence of language standardization forces on letter writing and language use generally during the late Georgian period? Nuria and Tino work on that strand. Language structure. How do the social networks around Hamilton reflect the progress of the wholesale realignment of the English auxiliary verb system in the late Georgian period? This is David and Tino's strand. These are then the 3 individual strands of research, across all of which Christine has been an invaluable support, especially when it comes to the material context of the letters, which is her area of specialism. But then finally, there's the 4th strand, which brings the 3 domains of inquiry together. Social networks. What commonalities and differences can be found in the operation and the relevance to reading, writing and everyday language of the social networks around Mary Hamilton? So, while we hope to break new ground in each of our disciplinary domains, potentially our most ambitious goal is to bring literary, historical, and linguistic domains of inquiry together when we think about how social networks influence patterns of cultural consumption, activity, and expression in Hamilton's circles. So, how will all that research be disseminated and informed? Here are the outputs, some already delivered, others still in progress, that have resulted or will result from the project. First, on our project webpage is a lively blog where we've all contributed articles, short essays and musings over the life of the project so far. We've also been fortunate enough to host much valued contributions from research assistants and volunteers. And some of these have really taken on a life of their own and have got picked up on social media or by mainstream publications such as The Times, Telegraph, the BBC and Tatler. And this has led to some public engagement with the project that has proved really useful as we've gone on to deliver presentations and contributions. Over the last 2.5 years, members of the team have introduced the project and presented work in progress at many seminars, conferences and roundtables, both online and in person. And indeed, many, certainly of our digital audience today, have been present at those events, and we thank you warmly for your feedback, input and challenges. This has helped us to get to the stage where we're writing our peer-reviewed journal articles. Over the coming months, the co-investigators will be submitting numerous articles co-authored with our research associates to peer-reviewed journals specialising in our home disciplines. These will summarise our findings relating to reading practices, norms and usage, and language structure. Those individual findings will then be evaluated in the co-written introduction to our edited collection. In the coming months, we will be submitting a proposal for an edited collection called Mary Hamilton and Her Circles, which will expand the parameters of Hamilton studies ever further. We're delighted to launch our call for papers today, and Nuria will say a bit more about this at the end of our presentation. Now, there are also outputs in the works relating to impact and engagement. I don't have time to address those right now, but would be very pleased to say more in the Q&A. But none of those outputs are the primary focus of this launch event today. We are here instead to introduce our biggest and most ambitious output, and the one which really underpins everything else, the digital edition of the Mary Hamilton papers itself. And I'm now going to hand over to Christine to tell you more about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I wanted to start by giving you a few sort of facts and figures about the edition. So I can say that the edition that where we've got to so far, it currently contains 1,664 items. And this includes, as Sophie was telling us, things like letters, notes and diaries from the Hamilton papers. Out of those 1,600 and odd items, we've now transcribed 1,500, a bit more than that. Almost every transcription that we've done has been checked at least once, and more checks are planned. Anyone who's worked on an edition like this will know that actually it's really quite difficult to get 100% correct transcription, and so that's something that is an ongoing thing for us, really. And in the near future, we'll be adding more items, so this will be chiefly images and metadata. We do have a few more transcriptions to add as well, and checking will continue. So that's really some of our jobs for the sort of near future here. For us, the process really began with photography. So the first thing that was involved really was the photographing of the individual physical letters and other documents that we had. Here I'd like to thank staff from JRRI and also from our external repositories for actually taking this biggest step, which we couldn't have really done anything without. We're still, one thing I should say actually is that we're still working on adding all of this material to Manchester Digital Collections as well, so there will be some further uploads as well. So for us, the process really that's taken up a lot of our time has been moving from this stage of photographs up to the transcription, and then eventually turning these transcriptions into something that can be displayed, as you can see on the far right there. So the transcription's actually taken up the vast majority of our time as postdoctoral associates. It's taken about 2 out of the 3 years of our work for us, so this has been a really substantial chunk. What you can see here is actually that we've done quite a lot of markup to the text, and this is something that certainly Tina will tell us a bit more about in a bit. One thing that we've tried to do is to stay as close to the original as possible in terms of visual structure. So what we've done is we've tried to take account of things like, for example, indentations. So you can see, I don't know if this shows, oh, I do. I'll try and use, no, that won't, okay. Well, in any case, you can see that, for example, the signature at the bottom is we've tried to replicate things like that as much as possible. What you will see when you look at the edition as well is that we have both diplomatic and normalised transcriptions. So on the left-hand side is our diplomatic transcription, and you can see that we've retained things like, for example, long S, whereas on the right-hand side in the normalised transcription, that's been regularised to round S. Another example of the kind of changes that we've made is, for example, if we have verbs that end in apostrophe D, they've been retained in the diplomatic, and again, updated and regularised in the normalised. And a final one, we've worked to expand abbreviations. So, for example, in the yellow, we can see at the bottom things like yours, YRS has been expanded to yours in full. Okay, and now I'm going to hand over to Tina, who's going to tell us in a little bit more detail about some of those editing practices.
Okay, thanks very much. Yeah, so we've been transcribing the texts using XML, as Christine has just shown. For this, we've been using a schema that was developed for the project by David, based on TEI guidelines. And that's allowed us to mark up all sorts of different things, not just abbreviations and all the spellings, as seen just now, but also other visual elements such as underlining, italics, as well as more structural issues like openings, signatures, address panels, etc. We've also been adding XML tags or elements to mark up what was unclear or illegible in the texts, whether corrections were made by the author or by later hands. Anything that was foreign we've been tagging, whether it's been a quotation, whether there was direct speech, and then elements like place names and personal names have been marked up as well as other forms of reference to individuals. So when people refer to my uncle, we made sure that that's marked up as well. We didn't bother with the pronouns, but those kinds of references are all marked up. And the details on our transcription editing practices for those interested are available on the project website. So if you go there, you can find more information on sort of all of the details and everything going on in the background of the transcriptions. Just to give you some examples of what that kind of markup and what it is and what it means for the transcriptions in the edition and in the two transcriptions, as Christine just pointed out, we've got a diplomatic and a normalised transcription. Here's an example from, this is Ham 2.1, which is one of the diaries that Mary Hamilton wrote, and it concerns a self-correction by Mary. You can see here maybe that September has been corrected into October by rewriting OCT in pencil across SEP, leaving the BR superscript. And this is how that's subsequently visualized in the edition. At the top, you can see the diplomatic version where it clearly shows you the original was cancelled and replaced. And then in the normalized version, you just see what was intended by Mary in the end. Now, it comes as no surprise that things like this, instances of self-correction, very often involve things like dates or sometimes times. Mary frequently had to correct herself when she said 7:15, but actually she meant 7:45 or 7:30. And she changes dates as well to some extent. But there are plenty of other interesting examples, including corrections of language, such as preposition, changes in prepositions or changes in words. And there are examples of corrections in spelling too. For example, here we can see that Anna Maria Clark, who was a close friend of Mary Hamilton, initially wrote Reflections with CT, and then corrected it by overwriting that with an X. And as you can see here, that is then represented as such in the diplomatic version of the text. You can see that at the top. And normally this will be reflected as such as well in the normalized version, but obviously because we want to use normalized contemporary spelling standards, this is obviously with CT how you'll find it in the normalized version, but you can still go back and see the initial writing and the initial correction in the diplomatic edition, or in the diplomatic transcription. Sometimes it doesn't so much concern self-correcting as it just changing the way that people refer to others. And this is an example taken from a letter by Mary Hamilton to Robert Blossett, in which she initially wrote Major Anson as the person who her daughter Louisa had been attached to, and then replaced that with the gentleman to whom you allude. We also see deletions of names like this, obviously for censorship purposes, and here it seems to have been done to simply prevent anyone other than the author and the recipient from knowing who was actually being talked about. And the reason here that the deletion of Major Anson isn't very good, and we can still read Major Anson underneath the deletion, is likely because this is a copy. Mary Hamilton wrote on the back of this letter, you know, this is a copy of a letter I wrote to so-and-so. Whether it's a draft or a later copy, we don't know. And this version of the text wouldn't have been sent, so that's probably why the deletion isn't very, very good. And as you can see here, as well as in previous examples from the transcriptions that we've been showing, is that the names and other references to people are highlighted with blue. And that's because we've been linking them with unique IDs to the people, to the individuals that are involved. And you can see here what happens in the edition, both in the diplomatic transcription and the normalized transcription, what happens when you hover over a blue name or a reference in either of these transcriptions. That data is drawn from what we've been calling the personography, which I'll tell you a little bit about next. Personography is really a database of all authors and recipients in the edition that we've been creating and updating as we went along transcribing everything, as well as every identifiable individual mentioned in the items that we have been able to transcribe. In it, we've recorded some basic biographical data, so date of birth, gender, as well as relational data for every individual and where this was known. Every person has been given a unique identifier, which we then use in our transcriptions in the markup that we talked about earlier, when they are mentioned in the text, either by name or by relation, for example, my uncle or my son or my wife. And that has functions within the edition itself, as you just could see with the tooltips. We also use the unique identifiers in the metadata when it concerns the authors and recipients, obviously, so the metadata of the items, which then allows us to search for letters by the individual correspondent, be it as an author or a recipient. The TEI format allows us to create and fill out multiple fields for various types of data, and there's of course the integration with MDC and the option to convert the data to different output formats. At the moment, the database is a collection of individuals. We've got about 2,500 roughly at the moment, with some basic data for tooltips. A bare bones version is available on the project website as well for those interested. And in the future, it'll be the basis of the edition's electronic person index, which will then allow users to also find every mention of a particular person based on their identifiers in the documents, as well as links to various external authority files, like the Oxford Dictionary of National Biography, and we'll be adding our own brief biographies as well. I'm going to hand over to Cassie now, who will tell you a little bit more about how we've been using all of this data for more research-related things so far.
So Tino has very kind of succinctly described what in many ways is the engine that powers all of the gossip in the Hamilton letters, but apart from kind of that's the latest interest of, you know, what who's talking about who in the 18th century, there is a kind of data-driven research agenda to this that is the kind of, by recording and tagging this data, as well as other kinds of data that we're happy to talk about in the questions, so all these other metatextual features, the edition then becomes a data set for our analysis, feeding into this research agenda Sophie talked about. So one of the tools that we're using here is the project database that has been built to our specifications by Hurist. And I believe Michael Falk is in the audience, so hello Michael, and if he is here, then any complicated questions later could go to him. So I just do the basics. So this is the launch of the edition, of course, not kind of a wider exploration of our research agenda necessarily. So I won't go into too much detail, but basically speaking, Hurist is a kind of humanities-specific database platform that is hybrid relational and graph data. And we have kind of got our own version of this to our specifications. So this custom-built Hurist database for the Hamilton project essentially reads our XML files and pulls out, so including not only the transcriptions of the letters and diaries and other material, but also our personography, which is another TEI format XML file. And it does various kind of translations of that to put it into the database, and it populates some entities from that and some we populate ourselves. So the ones it populates include the individuals from the personography. In the reading practices strand that Sophie and I work on, for example, it also populates sections of text that we have tagged as of interest to us, and those become entities within the database. And I'm using that as an example solely because it's the one that I know the most about. So every single tag instance of reading that we have tagged up as we go through, that's kind of buried in the metadata of the transcriptions, and that is translated into Hurist by scripts that Michael has written. I do not claim to do that myself, and that creates an individual record in that database and pulls out information from that source document, such as the fields that Tino was talking about of biographical data, like dates, so date of the instance, dates of birth of the individual that's linked to that, shelf mark of the document, the extract itself that we're working with. So we can use this as a basis then for populating further fields manually that relate to the reading experience. So as you can see here, individual readers, listeners, authors, texts, etc. I'm just going to go back slightly on this. So that's kind of, our lists of entities. These are all reading instances, and I've gone into one just in more detail here. You can see. So this is the reading experience that's connected to that, and it tells you who's present and who's the orator, who is listening. That's all linked to those individual XML IDs. So I think that gives you an idea of the kinds of things we're trying to do with it. I'll leave it at that level of detail for now. I could talk to you about particularly the reading practices data for hours. But in combination with the personography then, the point is that one of the many things that the Hurist database is enabling us to do, thanks to that kind of technical wizardry in the background, is extract data about, for example, networks of senders, recipients and mentionees, and translate this into a format that is interoperable with a range of open data tools. So that's what's really exciting, that we can, for example, export this into Gephi and use that as a network visualization tool. So that's going to allow us to trace networks via correspondence or shared reading or families or combinations of those, depending kind of how we play with the data. And it will allow us to identify how those networks are inflected by the various data encoded within our transcriptions and personography, such as temporal data or known relationships. So here is just a little visualization, kind of initial visualization in Gephi, which again, I feel like I'm saying, I didn't do this, Michael did this, but again, I have to credit Michael Folk for creating this initial social network for us as an example of what can be done in the database, and we are going to be producing lots and lots more of these. And so this shows us a network of senders and receivers. So Mary Hamilton is indicated with the purple and pink colour, so her node's in the middle, unsurprisingly. Shockingly, she received a lot of letters as represented by our database. We kind of knew that already. And then we've also done this kind of, divided this along gendered lines, so the blue nodes indicate female correspondence, the pink indicate male correspondence, and the green are gender unknown. And what you can also see here is there's another connection that emerges here, fairly strong connection between John Dickinson and Frederick Hamilton, which is this noticeable green line just on the side of the graph. So you start to see how, just by crunching those initial numbers of kind of senders and recipients, you start to get a picture of how that network operates. So we're coming to an end of the overview of kind of the back end of the transcription, the processes behind the scenes. And in a minute, I'm going to hand over to David Dennison to show you what you're all eagerly awaiting for, which is the snazzy result of all this hard work, and it is extremely snazzy. But before I do that, I just want to take a minute to acknowledge and celebrate something that's been a really consistent part of the ethos of this project and the building of this project. From the very beginning. It's a project that has enabled continual learning, not only for the core team, you know, we're constantly learning about new ways we can use new techniques, new ways we can work with the data, but in terms of the developmental opportunities we've tried to provide alongside that, and the real benefits of the project that have come from that. So the Hamilton project in its earlier iteration as the image to text project has always benefited hugely from student contributions, and we're delighted that some former student research assistants are in our, I believe in our online audience today, so hello to all of you. So within the current project specifically, so the funded AHRC project, we've been lucky enough to work with some fantastic interns funded by schemes at Manchester and York. The undergraduate scholars module at Manchester has also produced some wonderful work. Students at universities in Sweden, Spain, Germany, so it's kind of a really European collaboration, as well as a small number of interested volunteers who wanted to come and learn digital skills. So it's been a really kind of wide net in terms of our team. We've got to work with loads of people. So their contributions have included a range of tasks relating to the edition that contributed to our data-driven research as follows. So specifically the internships that we've run kind of during this project have focused particularly on two areas. So the first of these is the transcription of the diaries and the letters. So in terms of the kind of division of the work by interns, our brilliant interns at the University of York have been focused mainly on transcriptions of diaries and letters, and recently some of the manuscript book material as well that we didn't know formally that we'd have time to do. So that's been a huge contribution as well to our understanding, particularly of reading practices. So this has obviously contributed to the overall transcription coverage, which is wonderful. In return, we've been able to train students in our transcription practices, and in some cases the specific markup language that we're using, TEI, which we hope will provide useful transferable skills in their ongoing studies and future careers. And then the second kind of task group, I guess, is the personography, the gossip engine. So my favourite bit. We've had two fantastic interns at Manchester join the project this year and last year through the Student Experience Internship Scheme, and they've mainly been focused on work on the personography. So this has involved developing data skills and literary historical research and writing skills, tasks that include identifying individuals kind of from within letters, but also kind of working out who they are, cleaning data in our personography, because it's been very much, we kind of built it as we go along, and we've needed to sometimes refine how we do things. So there's been some very important, but also kind of sometimes a little repetitive work that all of us do, and also the student interns have been involved in that and kind of contributing to our data integrity in the project. And also our interns on the personography have written mini biographies for some of those more elusive individuals for whom other authoritative biographies don't exist elsewhere. So often what we'll do is we'll refer to another authority file, such as the ODMB, such as the VIAF, the Virtual Internet Authority files. If that doesn't exist, we think, well, we probably know the most from the letters, so what our interns have done, and we will continue to do, is create mini biographies that will appear on our edition, and we will become effectively the authority. So that's a really exciting role, I think, for them to be involved in. They're kind of making this incredible resource. So we're really grateful for the contribution of all of the students, volunteers who have been involved in these various ways, both in the previous project, the current project, and it's a really, like I'd say, it's a really happy community because of that. Personally, I'm really proud of what has always been that kind of ethos of the project from the very beginning, with David and Yuri's earlier work, which centred around kind of student learning, and that's what we've tried to continue to provide, so properly supported development opportunities for undergraduate and graduate students. And the building of this edition has enabled us to contribute to skills building and mentoring of the next generation of scholars, and it's been a real pleasure personally to have an excuse to work collaboratively with students, something you don't often get to do when you're in a kind of research-only role on aspects of that project. So now we're going to see the results of all this work, and I'm delighted to hand over to David Dennison to give you a guided tour of Manchester Digital Collections Hamilton edition. Are you reading?
One more slide.
There we go.
Thanks, Cassie. Yeah. My job is to talk you around what the edition currently looks like and how to find stuff in it. So that's what I'm hoping to be doing. I've got to do some clicking around before I can do it. So bear with me. I can't find a mouse pointer, Joe. How to click on new share. Oh, there it is. Yeah, it's gone off the screen. Thanks, Tina. Okay. And I'm getting there slowly. No, wrong one. Get me back in, Tina. We rehearsed this, and needless to say, I've cocked it up. The problem, apart from having an idiot do the presentation, is that we have to do these things separately for the people seeing it on Zoom and the people in the room. And that was too much. That's not what I want you to be seeing. What I want you to be seeing is the front page of our edition, which looks very nice. And we have to thank particularly Tom Higgins and Pete Morris for making it look so good, and also all the huge amount of work by Charlotte and others working on the admin side. Now, how do you find something in this edition? Well, if you move down the page to the lower left, Tom has built some very nice filters which allow you to search by class mark, words in the title, author, recipient. If it's a letter, there'll be a recipient, and even these rather fancy sliders for changing the range of dates that you're looking at. I'm going to start by using words in the title, because there are 1,600 items already on this website, and many more to come. You need a way of searching. You're not going to read it. Well, maybe you are suckers for punishment. You can actually click through them one by one, but if not, you need to search. So I'm going to put diary into the title field and apply that filter, which cuts 1,600 plus down to 30 odd. The diaries of Mary herself, but by the way, there are 2 more to come which aren't yet there. The diaries of Mary and her husband John Dickinson, and her father-in-law, John Dickinson Sr. And you'll see that you get these rather nice extended thumbnails for the ones selected by your filter, which show you the first page of whatever the document is, a brief snippet out of the summary, the date and the author, and if there's a recipient, the recipient. And it even warns you what you're in for in the way of how many pages. You can see 95 for that one. I'm going to ham 26. And chosen in part because Mary reused a piece of paper to begin her diary, which already had a drawing on it of a tree, but she turned the paper round. So if you want to see this tree, it's very easy to move the image round in 90-degree segments, or indeed any fraction of that. So there's the tree that she was using, the paper that she was using. On the right, I'm talking about anything except a phone or a very, very small tablet. Usually you get 2 panels in Manchester Digital Collections. The image is always on the left, and MDC, which is what I'll use from now on, works, it calls each image a page. So that is not necessarily a folio in the more traditional archival sense. In the right-hand panel, what you get by default is the About page, which in this case has a very long summary, because it's a diary of 100-odd pages, but at the bottom, the more conventional catalogue type information that you'd expect, and a little bit of project information too. To move through this document, you can step through, except I can't see the... What, how do I have to do that? This is something that didn't come up when we... No, I want... Oh, close that, yeah. You weren't supposed to see that. Okay, at the top, in the centre, he said, starting again, you can click through very easily, backwards and forwards, or you can put in, if you don't want to click through to a page 117, which is the one I want to go to, you can just enter it and go straight there. Now, this will show you a little bit of what Tino and the others have been demonstrating before. You don't need to keep looking at the summary. You can switch over to view more options and get the transcription there. And this now illustrates what we were talking about, that we're trying in the diplomatic transcription to capture what's actually on the page. So you can see here that Mary sent her, the Duchess of Portland sent her coach for me, was with her from, and then she changed her mind. So she's crossed that out, but we still show, because we can read it, what she first wrote with a strike through. Even if we can't read it, we put it in as a gap. She didn't come back to was with her until 4 or 5 lines further on. So you see her process of writing. I don't need to demonstrate the stuff that Tino and the others were talking about, the abbreviations, the pop-ups for the names, and so on. In general, if there is something visual on the page that shows you we've mucked around with the text, for example, the strike through for what's been deleted, or the little vertical bars here around lady that shows that she's just inserted that, when you mouse over those things, you get a little pop-up telling you what it is. But if there's nothing in the text, we've put blue marking, I say we, but Tom, with Tom's help, to show that it's worth mousing over, because you will get a tooltip that will give you more information. And if you're working on a touch screen, you touch the thing rather than mouse over. That's all I'm going to say about this diary. I'm going to go to another document. So I go back to the front page, reset the filter, which was set to diary, and this time I'm going to choose by class mark, because the one I want to look at is, haha, just press the wrong button. Thank you. Control F5. Not sure what I've done there. So I'm going to do it this way. Sorry. The class mark. The one I want, and I'll try again and try not to mistype, is ham 12099, and you'll see that you get prompted with what's available as you go along. I'll choose that and I'll apply the filter, and now of course there's only one available, and I'll go to it, and I've chosen this in part because it's one of my favourite writers, Francis Napier, and one of the reasons I like him so much, he's obviously a very nice chap and incredibly rude. This is an age of politeness. All the letters, almost all the other letters are filled with, you know, my dear Miss Hamilton, I'm so glad, blah, blah, blah. Not Francis. He's really, really rude to her. They have a correspondence that lasts over 40 years until her death. They grew up together. They treat each other as brother and sister. One of the things I want to show you is just a trivial thing, really. You can, of course, what I forgot to say, magnify the text easily. And I want to show you the end of line 5, where he has written the word presuming, but he only had room for the pre. I'm so used to a touch screen, this is taking too long. Yeah, you can see it? Okay, and he's used a hyphen. They don't always bother with hyphens. He's actually used a double hyphen, and he's used it both on the first fragment and on the second. We mark that. Okay, bear that in mind. This is the diplomatic transcription, but you also have the option of the normalized transcription, which has been talked about before, and there you'll see for this particular item, the word presuming has been reconstructed on the first line. So if you're searching for words or names, you're searching always in the normalized transcription, so you don't have to worry about the other one, which you wouldn't have found. There's also a little touch which we're proud of, because you can't see the transcriptions side by side. The normalized transcription is as clean as we can make it. There's no above the line, below the line, there's no superscript, subscript, there's no formatting at all, but there is colour. So it still has the tooltips for people and one or two other things, but if you're not colourblind, you can see that presuming is in red, and that's tied to the presuming, which was in red on the diplomatic. So the point is, you know that the other transcription has something different, if that's important to you. So that's how you move through the edition, through an item, but you can move through a whole series or sub-series using the previous item, next item tools, buttons, and the order that you have is always, how do I get rid of this? It's been there annoying me for hours. Right. The previous item, next item, will take you to what they say, or what it says on the tin, and that is usually in the order of catalogue order, quite, you know, routinely, except where we've mucked around with it. Every now and then, where we have either changed the attribution of a letter, or changed the date, or figured out the date, which the archivist didn't have time to do or didn't feel secure enough because it wasn't explicit, we sometimes change the sequence. And in the case of the correspondence between Mary and George, Prince of Wales, the Royal Archives catalogued those as two separate sequences. We interweave them and change the chronology so that you can actually see how the correspondence develops. Okay, enough of that. You know how to find things in the edition based on the metadata using those filters. How do you find what was actually said? This way. This is another database associated with the project. Unlike Curis, this one is available to any user. It's called CQP Web. It was put there, it was chosen by Nuri and me, who are linguists. It's Corpus Query Processor. But in fact, I think you'll see that even if you're a normal person, you know, a historian or a literary scholar or whatever, this is good too. It's very simple if you want it to be simple. If you want to search for a word, name, whatever, you just type it in this box here. And I'm going to choose a very linguist's choice of phrase. And you'll think, what's interesting about this? Well, not very much in itself, but it's just a demo. Have written. And all you do is click Start Query. And you immediately get, because you're not in the edition now, you're in a pre-indexed thing in this database, you immediately get what's a concordance with all the hits for have written, and there are 100 of them apparently in the corpus. You get 10 words on either side, which usually makes it visually enough to scan down and see, am I interested in this or not? But if it's not enough context to be sure, you just click on the search term and you get several lines of context. And this context, like the search you've done, is rather like the normalized text in the edition. It's not identical, but it's very close. And so you can see have written there in the middle. If you want even more context, you can have it. And you can repeat that. I'll take it back, less context. And I'll now switch to the alternative view, which has been provided, which is much more like the diplomatic transcription. And you'll see now we've got long S, we've got underlining, we've got superscripts and so on. When I said has been provided by Professor Sebastian Hoffmann of the University of Trier, who has done all the indexing for CQP Web, came at short notice and really has gone way beyond the call of duty. There's much more now than we ever hoped to have. Let me just go through some. I'm not going to go through 100 hits, but let me go through the first 7. Here we have in the middle, I think I'm a graceless creature to have written. True, I may have written to you. What I have wrote. Of course, in the 18th century, have wrote is perfectly grammatical. But because you were searching in the normalized text, have written was enough to capture have wrote, have written, and indeed have writ, all of which occur somewhere in the corpus. And you'll find that have wrote is actually at least as common as have written. Okay, I'll go back to the concordance. So you can see the 10 words on either side, or you can see several lines of context, or you can see lots and lots of lines of context, but maybe you actually want to go back to the edition. So if I choose this one, in the third column you have the concordance, in the second column you have the reference, the class mark, and it will tell you there who wrote, from where, to whom. And if you go to the first one, and that is actually an open book symbol, I don't know if that's visible. If you mouse over it, it tells you that it's on word 106 on page 1. no, this one, word 44 on page 3, and you think, okay, so I'm going to have to go back, find that letter and go down to there. No, you just click on the open book, it opens a new tab in your browser, and you're in the edition, immediately in the right text, on the right page. And it was useful to be told it was word 44, because that means it'll be fairly near the top of the page, so you can find it quickly. And there we have Mr. Napier would have wrote you a postscript. You can tell from the spelling, this is actually Francis Napier's mother writing to Mary Hamilton. So we think this search tool, CQP Web, is actually going to be very useful, and it does much more than just searching for odd words. I don't have time to go through too much of this, but for example, if you're interested in, I don't know, heroism, heroic, heroically, and so on, you can just search for hero star using a very predictable, what's the word? No, it's not the word I want. Anyway, never mind. And you'll get heroic, heroine, heroines, and so on. You'll also get loads of examples of hero, most of which turn out to be Charlotte Boyle Walsingham, because that was the nickname they used, that Mary used for her in the diaries, particularly. You can search, you can restrict the search to, let's go back to the search screen. You can restrict, by default you're searching the whole corpus, but you can restrict it to individual writers. If you use restricted query, you can not just restrict it to individual writers, you can choose the collection, you can choose the date of origin, and you can choose multiple dates of origin, place of the receiver, and so on. And you can combine these to really focus your search on what you're particularly interested in. You can also search for every mention in the corpus of a particular individual using what's been talked about already, the personography, the fact that there's a unique ID for each of them. You can search for place names, you can search for foreign words in a particular language. If you're interested who uses Italian, there's one mention of Portuguese, you can get them. All of this indexing is based on the markup that our team has put into the texts, but in addition, it has been automatically tagged for part of speech, which of course for us linguists is very useful, and in addition, it's been tagged semantically. And the semantic tagging is based on a Roger Thesaurus type of arrangement, which you can look up, we give the reference for it. And for example, one I've used that seems to work quite well, there's a category health and medicine, or some such, and if you click on that, you get hundreds and hundreds of hits which are relevant to, you know, recovered, feeling better, well, ague, all sorts of things, you know. But it's a bit hit or miss, as you would expect. And your query history is saved so that you can go back and either reuse or adapt what you've just done. What I'm about to do is extremely embarrassing, apart from all the other things that have embarrassed me, because you'll see I spent 10 minutes before the coffee break trying to remember how to do a particular search until I got it. And it's this one, which is Horace Walpole, who's mentioned dozens and dozens of times in the corpus. How often is he mentioned within 20 words of the word picture, singular or plural, or the word painting? And the answer is 7. So you can see, you don't have to be a linguist to be interested in co-occurrence ideas. You can do an enormous amount with this thing. Okay. Now I've got to go through a process that didn't go brilliantly earlier. I want to go down to this slide. And
you need to start the slides first.
all right, thank you. Thank you. In my house, I'm the technically sophisticated one, but around this. Yeah. And I want, I think, that one. Yeah? Are we there? Yeah. Thank you. Okay, just to sum up what I've said at too much length. You've got an edition with a very full set of images. Tom's count is nearly 13,000 in the Hamilton collection alone. Editing and checking are continuing. I must emphasize this. We really hope you'll start playing with this, what we think is rather impressive tool. Playing with it and perhaps using it for research, that would be good too. We really want it to be used that way. But if you're using it for research, bear in mind that we haven't quite finished. We're finding errors and fixing them, and we're adding more texts. We will have transcribed about half of the total number of items that are now going to be in the collection. Nearly 1 million words transcribed. There's a diplomatic transcription which attempts to capture what's on the page, a normalized transcription which attempts to capture the final intent of the author, but in addition clarifies things by expanding abbreviations. If, for example, the author has, the technical term is blanked a name, just put a dash. If we know who it was, we put the actual name in the normalized transcription. And spellings are modernized, not place names or personal names, but all other words and verb forms likewise. We hope you won't be daunted by the CQP Web search engine. It's a wonderful tool, and if you go to the page, it has a lot of help actually on the page to walk you through it, and we've put quite a few sample searches on our website, and there's also on our website a quick start guide to the edition, to using the edition. You can do simple searches and you can do more complex queries, and the project website has background, latest news, and all sorts of links that we think you'll find useful. The basic master files on which all of this is built are going to be released at the end of the project, but not just yet. But in the meantime, if anyone's interested in complete text files, either diplomatic or normalized or both, let us know, because we're very happy to give those out. Okay, thanks. Now I hand over to Noreen.
Okay, so thanks. As Sophie said, one of the outputs of the project is an edited volume. So we'd like to tell you now about the call for papers, which is out, and you can find it also on our website under the blog section. So the title of the edited volume will be Mary Hamilton and Her Circles, an edited collection, and this will be the first full-length book in a century since the publication of Anson and Anson 1925. This will address the life, writings, language, and networks of Mary Hamilton. And we would like to pay particular attention to Hamilton's position within the various social networks we've been talking about before. For instance, the court of George III, the Blue Stocking Circle, other London friends, the connections in the Northwest, and so on her family as well. And we would like to examine these themes from several perspectives. So we welcome proposals from any discipline which may address literary historical topics, literary features in her writings, linguistic features as well, her reputation, or any combination of those, and you've got more suggestions on the website. So some practical information for now. We envisage contributions between 6,000 and 9,000 words, but all we need for now will be the abstract and the short author biography, 500 words each. So please have a thought and have a look around Manchester Digital Collections and also CQP Web to explore the materials and submit your abstract and short author biography to the maryhamiltonpapers@gmail.com address. And the deadline we have in mind is the 2nd of December, so you still have 2 months to get familiar with the materials and submit your proposals. So now we come to the conclusion of the session, so back to Hannah.
Obviously, on a project this big, we have so many people to say thank you to, but we don't have lots of time, so I'm going to be very quick, which doesn't mean we're not very, very thankful. First of all, we're really thankful to our funders, the Arts and Humanities Research Council, and we're very grateful to our employers who have supported this project, the Universities of Manchester, Vigo and York. The advisory board, our critical friends, absolutely crucial. They have been supporting us and continue to do so. I'm not going to read out names here because I have 4 slides. Particularly thankful within the University of Manchester to our friends and colleagues at the Research Institute and Library, particularly heroic, I think, with the imaging department who got back to taking images as soon as they could after lockdown. Also lots of really important technical support from both within the University of Manchester and outside it. Other project collaborators here who we really wanted to name check, and lots of people from outside of the immediate project teams of the universities that we work in who've really kindly given their time, energy and ideas to the project, including lots of people on other correspondence projects. Very grateful for their input. All the fantastic research assistants and volunteers that Cassie had told you about, and others who have given their time and energy and interest to the project, and also the postgraduate students who worked for us and have been working for Nuria and David, or working with them, I should say, for a very long time. We also want to say thanks to the Anson family who have been involved in discussions with us over the project. It's very nice to have their interest. I said last but not least in the last slide, and then I've got another thing. So very, very last but not least, our thanks to all the other collections that had Mary Hamilton papers that have allowed us to reproduce. The Royal Collection Trust, Harvard Library, Stanford Libraries, Vassar College, the Morgan, Derbyshire Record Office, British Library, Lancashire County Council, New York Public Library, and the Yale University Library. Thank you. Without you, this would not have been a complete edition, and it's as complete as we can hope to make it. Finally, I'll just leave you with some links. All these links are available on the project website as well. Thanks so much for coming today. We're handing over now to Nuria, who's going to share this next discussion, where we want your questions, comments, as critical as you like, but please keep it friendly. I think one thing I can say about working on this project has been what fun it has been to work with such a friendly group of people. So thank you, Hamilton team.
So it's time now for questions or comments. We've got one online already, so if anybody wants to add more, or we can check some from the audience here as well. We do have Ingrid, a question here. Hi Ingrid. She was asking whether we can upload transcribed texts into CQP Web. I think not as an not as individual text, as an individual user, but if you've got a collection of texts, as we do, the person to contact be Andrew Harvey, and think of their collections as a whole to be uploaded. That would be the way to.
Is Ingrid talking about we ought to have her on screen really?
No. Oh, yeah, by the way, Ingrid, if you want to have
you a technical challenge.
camera on.
If she's talking about uploading other material which she has, the CQP Web page allows you to upload up to 1 million words of your own. And there's obviously how to do that.
That's a question I had. Thank you.
We need the sound on. Ingrid, you're muted at the moment.
She can't unmute herself, I don't think. Can she unmute herself, or do you have to do that?
She should be able to unmute herself.
Okay.
She can't.
I don't think she can.
Is the laptop muted?
No, the laptop's good now. It's just that we're wondering how to unmute you, Ingrid. And we think, hang on,
I don't see it.
where's the chat?
Oh, participants. Yeah, participants.
There we go. Hang on, I'm going to. There we go. I think we should be able to hear you now.
Okay, can you hear me now? Can you?
Yes, sorry. Sorry, that took a bit longer, but yes, we can hear you now.
First of all, hi everybody. Congratulations on this fantastic project. I'm really impressed. I've seen bits and pieces coming along over the years, and to see that it's now in the stage in which we can all do research in this wonderful way. My question was just, I mean, it's been answered, Dave, thank you. I was just wondering if I could use CQP Web for a collection of letters I've been transcribing for the University of Cambridge. That's the question I had. But thank you for giving me the floor, Nuria. Thank you.
So yeah, as it said, CQP Web's up to 1,000?
Up to 1 million.
Million, sorry.
Yeah, but I mean, it's not me that's offering it, it's Lancaster University.
So yeah, if there is a big collection, Andrew Hardy would be the contact person, yeah.
Do you want to chat?
Got some very nice comments, but I don't know if we can really read those out without just sounding self-congratulatory.
Oh yeah, Rita has a question. Who says, could you explain again why have written retrieves instances of have wrote as well? Is it because you changed wrote to written in the normalized edition? If so, which principles did you follow for the implementation of such research?
Oof. Okay, I guess that's yeah, thank you. Yes, we did change wrote to written, in the sense that we gave both wrote and written, one of which is chosen for the diplomatic, the other for the normalized. We used we used the Oxford English Dictionary to judge whether changes, whether what somebody had written at the time was normal at the time, in which case we marked it as original, orig, and then just regularized it, or in some way idiosyncratic even at the time, in which case we marked it with sig. And I think we know enough modern standard English to know that I have written is generally regarded as standard. I don't think we felt we needed to. Look, am I digging a hole for myself here? I can't see Richard there, but what were you leading towards?
Oh yeah, thank you.
Should we ask Richard to
Yes.
unmute? Yeah. Oh, okay. He says his camera and his mic aren't working very well, but you've explained it well, so thanks. Yes, thank you. Thanks.
Any more to read out? I don't think we've missed any there. Any comments? Chris? Yes, please.
Question. Thank you very much. It was really great to see how you're using the collection as well, how you're just seeing it from the NBC side. I was wondering, given that between you, you've gone into every single letter, every single word that's been on there, whether you've had any kind of pet projects that you would now like to go off and discover for yourself as a collection.
The short answer was one.
So,
There's a literary answer, there's a misanswer.
Sophie, do you want to speak to the reading practices?
to come back into view.
Any pet projects that we want to see was the question. Yes, it's the difficulty is knowing what to pick, really. One thing that immediately strikes me, so Cassie and I work on reading practices, and we've been looking at how Mary Hamilton and her circles read, when they read, where they read, why they read, what they read, who they read, etc. And one really wonderful slice of the Rylands archive, and also a slice of the Lancashire archive, are the manuscript books that Mary Hamilton kept, in which she writes particular pieces of verse and prose, anecdotes, epigrams, riddles, entries from her own diaries, bits of her own letters, things that she finds important or interesting or worthy of preservation. And those, I think, give us a really fascinating insight into what she saw as worthy of preservation and recirculation, because then what she's written becomes part of her reading practices. And one of our interns, brilliant intern, Caroline Ritchie from the University of York, when she had breezed through all the hard work that we had given her, actually went to work doing inventories of those manuscript books, and she's done a phenomenal job. And Cassie and I have been rolling around ideas recently about how we can make those available to people who work on manuscript books or commonplace in culture or anything around that. So I think that those resources are completely fascinating for literary scholars of 18th century studies, and I hope very much that something concrete will come out of it. So that's my contribution.
I suppose another thing I could add, kind of, as we're speaking of interns, is that actually some of our interns and volunteers who've kind of taken these interests in their own directions. I know that we've had volunteers who've used parts of the letters as parts of their dissertation work at York, and we've had a number of blogs from undergraduate scholars, and one of our recent volunteers, Emma, wrote there's a lovely blog about an earring theft, like this kind of scandalous, it happens in the street, and it's very distressing actually, and the way Hamilton writes about it in different places, and also the reports of the incident. So Emma constructs a lovely little blog piece about that, and we've got another blog post coming from a recent intern, Sadie, who's been looking at some of the kind of issues around illegitimacy that kind of come out of the letters. So that's so these little side projects for our interns, you could go and read about on our blog, because those are moments where, just as you say, people just from kind of doing the work of transcription have found things that are interesting and they want to know more about. So I'd really, again, encourage you to go and look at the website for those. And we've also, ourselves as the researchers of the project, when we found things that we think might be interesting in their own sake, often we've constructed blog posts around those. So in terms of like just what we happen upon, that's probably a really good place to start if people want to read more.
You? Like for the research strand 3, the norms and usage, I first was interested on the letter writing manuals and see how, well, I am still, but that was the original idea, to look at the letter writing manuals and then see whether the letter writers would follow the instructions. So that's one of the areas I want to investigate more. But while working with the transcriptions, we've become very interested in the forms of address, so the dear Miss Hamilton or Mrs. Dickinson, and the salutations at the end as well. So that's what we've been working more from the linguistic perspectives, and we want to elaborate more because so far we've investigated the letters binary, but then we've got all of the others more, actually in number, to Mary. So over time, especially for those collections where we have like at 40 years was it Napier writing to Mary, whether it changes once she gets married or if she moves outside London, so loads of different factors. And so far we've just been looking at Mary's letters, but for the letters to her, we expect more variation. And for the social network analysis, that would be, at least for us, fascinating. That's the bit to follow up.
Indeed.
Well, our strand is last because the other two strands were marking up stuff that would interest them as the other markup was being done. We had to wait for the part of speech tagging, which we only got at the end of last month. So we're effectively starting our research on those things now. The main extension I can think of for the future is going beyond the Hamilton collection to other late 18th century collections, because we're building up links with other projects so that we can expand the network circles and expand the amount of data, because for a linguist, 1 million words is not a large amount. It's pretty good, but it's small by modern standards. And the bigger the data set, the more interesting things you can find.
Kristen? Can I add to that?
Yeah, I've been looking, I've become a postal nerd. So, I've just become fascinated by sort of the material evidence that we have for the fact that these letters were actually sent from person A to person B. But also the fact that, despite the fact that these are letters written by the aristocracy, nobody wants to pay postage. So they're making fraudulent use of the fact that their friends who have positions as MPs, for example, can have free postage. And it's really fascinating because it's not just that people make use of this free postage when they're not entitled, but they talk about it so much in the letters. And so they'll be saying things like, well, you know, I hunted everywhere so that I could get this free postage for you because you're so valuable to me as a friend. And that shows you really interesting insight into what's happening kind of physically with these letters, as well as what's inside. So, yeah, that was an unexpected bonus for me, something I hadn't really anticipated.
And we've been coding that as well. So the trace panel and if there is a red or a black seal, that has been coded as well in the system. Yeah, different signatures too.
Yeah, and Natasha's Simeonova just added as well that a lot in Bedfordshire constantly talk about franking as well. Thanks also to everyone, by the way, for your kind words. People have just been going through the chat, as you can all see. And if you have any questions, by the way, when we're all done, feel free to get in touch with the team. I think we have a contact form on our website, and otherwise people will be able to, know where to find us through the usual channels. If you have any other questions that we can always come back to later.
And for the call for papers, the email address is also for any queries related to the edited volume, not just for the submission.
Yeah. And something perhaps I should have said, which is, once you start playing around with the collection, you will find errors, I'm sure, or you will be able to figure things out which we couldn't read, stuff that we couldn't read, whatever. Please don't feel shy of telling us, worrying about sounding pedantic or something. This team can out pedantic, and I would really, really like to know. So please do.
Can I quickly ask, following on the comments about postal systems, did the original physical letters or the physical archive feature at all in the research, or were you working entirely from digital copies?
You did make use of some sort of physical library visits. I mean, sometimes even when you've got the photographs of the pictures, obviously you can see what's in there, but sometimes you just can't recreate the physical makeup of the item, and that can be really useful, just to be able to check that. I think occasionally we've looked to kind of check sort of readings of things as well, where maybe you can't quite tell.
We spent a lot of time kind of looking under folds like that, didn't we? Which you can't really do with flat photography, so it would have been lovely if we could have spent more time on the violence, to be honest, but what we did need, the things we needed to confirm, we did get to kind of do the thing, which was necessary.
I suppose in the event, because we had to work remotely for so much, we've made a virtue of doing as much with the photography as we could, whereas perhaps we'd have taken more advantage of the physical artifacts if we'd been able to. So maybe that's next on my list.
And there are some things that are just not readable with, you know, without seeing document because it's very faint, or because it's a bit creasy, because often it's because like the corner is a little bit too folded up, so you can very deep under it, you couldn't flatten it along the photograph. So I think, yeah, that gave some really good excuses to come work in the violence and see each other, which is great.
I think also for our general understanding of sometimes how intricate this all was, when you see a diary on NDC, massive image, high resolution, it's great, and then you come here and you realise it's actually maybe 5 by 10 centimetres, and you realise how tricky it must have been to write it. There's a materiality to it that you can't get really through MDC, I guess, in that respect, which is always, I think, nice and interesting.
It's always a surprise. You just tend to assume that everything is the same size on screen. You can't help that assumption, and it's only when you confront it that you see the reality.
So we shouldn't jump the physical archive.
No, please no.
I think this is a really good example, a case study of, and there are many of a research project and the way that people have worked around COVID. There'll be many examples of that, and I myself am involved in more than one, but it's been, everybody's been very resourceful and resilient, but there are some things that weren't ideal for us that we have to work on, and I think not working with physical archive as much as we would have in one of them.
Yeah.
Any more questions or comments from audience or from the chat? Yeah.
Well, again, I guess from us also a very massive thanks to everyone who joined.
Yes.
Online and here at the Rylands. And yeah, as we've said before, I think if anyone has any questions afterwards or feedback, or as David mentioned, if there's things on the edition that you spot that we may have missed, just let us know. It's going to be very much a sort of an ongoing tinkering and checking and uploading for the foreseeable future.
And we hope to have the first final edition in spring 2023. So we'll send an email around when we have the next. Still need Tom and Charlotte to work with us for a little bit for the next batches. But then, yes, spring 2023 we have. We hope to have first full edition. Yeah. So we close. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, with that said, I think, yeah, we should just thank everyone again. So goodbye. We will be looking off now. Thank you very much for joining.